All right, Arlen, here we go. Ready to
Okay,
record. Arlen and I met through the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, and this is going to be a bit of a special episode. So I'm going to let him introduce himself. Good seeing you. Who are you?
thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. So tell me a little bit about yourself. Yeah, I'm the president, the co-founding president and CEO of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, which is a global, not-for-profit, open biomedical and clinical innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem. Our mission is to help our members. We're a subscription membership model. It's pretty cheap. It's $80 a year, and we have special rates for students, residents, fellows, interns, that kind of stuff. Um, but our mission is to help our members get their ideas to patients, or because it's an open innovation network and anybody can join, if you're interested in helping someone get an idea to a patient, then we welcome you to join too. Those people are typically techies, entrepreneurs, service providers, investors, economic development people, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a fantastic mission that you have, and I think bringing innovation to the bedside. I mean, there's so much lag time these days in medtech, so trying to shorten that time frame, I think, could be truly beneficial. But how did you
Yeah.
get to be at this place? I mean, you have that MD after your name. So
Yeah.
what's your story?
So the short version is traditional medical education background. Now, remember, the people listening to this, I'm not a spring chicken. So I'm telling you a story that happened many, many years ago, and there's a reason why I'm prefacing this by saying that. So anyway, I started a traditional medical career, college, medical school, residency, wound up being a professor at the University of Colorado as an academic ear, nose, and throat surgeon. During that time, myself and several other people invented a gadget that optically detects cancer in the mouth. And the result of that experience taught me a couple things. One, I was totally clueless about what to do about it. Two, every white coat thinks they have a good idea, but they generally don't, or it's just an idea and it has no potential. Even if they had a good idea, they wouldn't know what to do with it. And there's not a whole lot of folks around teaching people what to do with it. So that is basically the trigger that motivated me to do what I presently am doing now, which is, long story short, I see myself as an entrepreneurial attending. I used to be a surgical attending. Now I teach, I do some research stuff. I help, instead of helping doctors and doctors at the operating room, trainees, I help founders and companies to achieve whatever they're trying to achieve. And I run the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. So the take-home message, I think, from that story is the thing that motivates me to do this is not so much passion. I think that's kind of overblown. I mean, just do what you love and money will follow. I don't think that's true. I mean, there's a lot of myths about all this stuff. But basically, I identified something that really pissed me off. I just didn't like it that I was doing what I was doing, and I just couldn't get this thing over the goal line because I didn't have the knowledge, skills, competencies to do it. And there were very few places to go to get them. So I looked around. There weren't a whole lot of folks interested or doing it at the time, so we did it. We created the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs to do it.
Yeah. No, you're so right. It's definitely looking at the traditional medical system, and especially the way the system is run now, and certainly when I went through all my training, it's heavily focused on the technical know-how of medicine, how to do surgery, how to do certain procedures, how to do diagnosis, and not so much on anything else within medicine, right? The business of medicine, the how to be efficient with your scheduling, how to deal with insurance companies. what's your place within the system, right? None of that is actually taught, but all of that is so important. So I'm also curious, from your perspective, how all of that has changed over the course of
Right.
your own career.
Well, no, I tell people that when I still work at the University of Colorado to do some stuff, but when I was a full-time academic surgeon there, I told people that I basically worked in three of the University of Colorado is a public university. It's a large academic medical center with all the bells and whistles. But I tell people that at that time, I worked for three of the most change resistant industries in the country: sick care, higher ed, government. So I was pushing and people like me were pushing a pretty big rock up a very steep hill and
Yeah,
still are. So that said, and oh, by the way, the conventional wisdom is it takes 17 years for a medical discovery or invention to find its way into the clinical care, let alone the standard of care. So it takes a very long time for these things to happen. And it's no different with changing systems. It just takes a long time to create social change or business change. So um, it 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 has, to your question. So how do I compare then to now? I think I'm reasonably optimistic, and so the answer to your question is I think actually now is the golden age of physician entrepreneurship. Now, a lot of people will push back and say, now, wait a minute, all these doctors are burned out, everybody's quitting, there's all these pipeline leaks, everybody's grumpy, they're all saying they're not going to practice anymore, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I would say, yeah, but first of all, what people say during the height of a pandemic is not what they're going to do when it ends. And the latest example are nurses and back in the day, 2 years ago, all you read about was 25% of doctors are going to quit and 50% of nurses are going to quit within 2 years. Well, guess what? When you fast forward to today, the nurses didn't quit. And I don't think most of the doctors are going to quit. And we can get into that conversation why, but I just don't think they will. People are reevaluating things, but do I think they're going to hang it up and write a novel? No, I think things are going to change. So I think the the persona of people going into medicine has changed. I think COVID basically changed lots, if not everything, in society in terms of work-life balance, purpose of life, what do I want to do when I grow up, et cetera. It's work from home, remote work, women's issues, et cetera. And I think that the ecosystem of medicine, particularly the corporatization of medicine, has changed. Private equity has changed. Uh, Private practice is essentially on life support. So I think the environment and the rules, more importantly, have changed. That is the legislation, the regulations, the oversight, et cetera. So when you look at that environmental scan, what has changed in the last 2 years? Lots. Now, the next question then is, well, then how does that manifest itself in what we're talking about? That is physician innovation and entrepreneurship. Now, when I say physician, I really mean healthcare professionals. This could be nurses, doctors, pharmacists, but for the sake of argument, let's just talk about physician entrepreneurship. So the next observation, or the next basic pillar of this conversation, is that the rules drive ecosystems, and ecosystems drive business models, and business models either get in the way of innovation or opportunity or facilitate it. So the rules of society, the rules of legislation, of oversight, have changed And that's what follows the ecosystem. So corporatization is an example. If the FTC or the federal government says, we think antitrust, like the Gilded Age, is a bad idea, but Optum employs 70,000 doctors, then there's some cognitive dissonance in all of that.
Sure.
I mean, that just doesn't make sense to me. You're blowing smoke. So if you're telling me that you're trying to lower the cost of care, when we all know that consolidation of healthcare delivery has increased the quality of care, if you're telling me that every single year when the budget comes out, and yesterday the Department of Health and Human Services guy had to testify in front of Congress and justify a 1.7 trillion dollar already committed spend. Now, let me remind the audience, the United States, we, the taxpayer, we are the single payer, the taxpayer,
Right.
through taxes and through foregone wages and benefits. So we, the taxpayer, are putting into the kitty $4.5 trillion, estimated to grow to 6 in the next 4 to 5 years. We've heard this story for 100 years. When people started healthcare reform initiatives, it's called the 100 Years War of Healthcare Reform. And every year it's called unsustainable, but we keep sustaining it.
Right.
So it's this oxymoron. It's this perpetual unsustainable business model. So why am I talking about all this stuff? To answer your question, because these are the things that promote physician innovation and entrepreneurship. So that goes back to your first question. What's different? The landscape has changed. And so there are pull factors and there are push factors. Why do people pursue this line of opportunity? Why do physicians and other healthcare professionals do this? 2 fundamental reasons. They want to or they have to. And why is it happening? Because there are push forces and there are pull forces. So, there's that old joke, people divide the world into a 2x2 matrix. Those that divide the world into a 2x2 matrix and those that don't. So if you look at the 4 boxes, you're in one of those 4 boxes. So you're either being pushed or pulled, or you want to or you have to. And you do the tic-tac-toe and figure out where you want to be. And that's kind of the simplistic Cliff's Notes of physician entrepreneurship drivers and opportunities.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with the idea that physicians definitely need to reinvent themselves. I mean, I can see that even from my own life. Medicine was an entirely different animal when I started this journey 20 years ago, right? When I set out to pursue a career in medicine, healthcare back then was very different than what it is now. And so even for me, I have to look back and think about what was my motivation, what was my drive, how did I get to be here, and how do I fit into this model? And so this whole idea of having to reinvent yourself, I think is absolutely spot on. And I think also the idea that a physician is, or any healthcare professional is just that for the entire career, for their entire lifetime, is definitely an outdated model. I mean, we see this in all other industries, right? People constantly reinventing themselves, finding new career paths, new opportunities, doing something different. And people don't hold jobs for as long as they used to. But my question, though, on the entrepreneur side of thing, is, with all the additional regulation that we now have in place that really makes some of that innovation more difficult, more challenging, right? There's more regulatory burden, more paperwork to go through. It's harder to find financing, even for a lot of the innovations that are truly out there. And then on top of that, you look at the statistics that the majority of physicians are now in employed positions. They're no longer, like you said, private practice, right? Private practice is dying out because everybody's employed, which means now any intellectual property that you create as part of that employed position sometimes is owned by the person who owns you, the entity that owns you, that pays your bills every month. So where do you see how do you see all that fitting in?
All
Because
right. So you touched on several topics. One is, first of all, so you touched on employed physicians, entrepreneurial finance, intellectual property ownership.
right, yeah, right.
So which one do you want to talk about first?
Well, take them all. I mean, I'm just
All
thinking there's
right,
going to be a lot of people that are going to,
all right, all
be
right. So let's
skeptical of your approach.
let's talk about employed physicians. So uh, the the latest numbers are, you said that everybody's employed. Well, that's actually not true. So 75%, roughly 70 to 75% of actively practicing physicians are employed.
Right,
Now, there's approximately a million active practicing clinicians in the United States. So we're talking about roughly 700,000 people who are working for the man
right.
or for the woman, to be politically correct.
Some
Right.
entity. Yeah,
Some entity, right? A he, she, or whatever the person. So that's the fact. And the numbers have consistently gone up over the last 5 to 10 years.
right.
I think it was 2 years ago that the numbers crossed private practice, independently owned positions versus employed,
Yeah,
and
I think
it's
it was 22.
significantly, yeah, so it's significantly gone up over the last couple of years. So, and the question's why, and there are many, many reasons, but the fundamental reasons have to do with, and I'll give you an example, have to do with why residents and medical students choose to work for the man. Um, and incident and fundamentally, it has to do with uh, because they're up to their eyeballs in debt and they want a reliable paycheck.
Yes. Right. Absolutely.
Because they don't want to be hassled. And I'm not making this up. These are the survey results.
Right.
Uh, they're risk averse. They have never been taught the business of medicine, so they're afraid to do it. And their persona, again, goes back to the persona has changed. They want work-life balance. They don't want to work as many hours. And all these are legitimate issues. I'm not dismissing them. I mean, many of us trained, or the good old day, grumpy old doctor. We're the old fuddy-duddies, 120 hours a week, every other night, blah blah blah. Nobody cares about that anymore, and probably justifiably. But it's a good news, bad news story. You learn stuff when you work 120 hours a week that you don't learn when you work 35 hours a week,
Sure.
which is now in front of the Senate. So again, the ecosystem, the environment has changed. So that's what the drivers and why people are working or in employed situations. So that leaves 35%. Now I'm in independent practice. The question is, in this conversation, what is the impact on innovation and physician entrepreneurship when you are employed? Is that a barrier to innovation? Is it harder for big companies to innovate? The answer is no. I mean, look at Google, Apple, enormous companies that are constantly testing and changing their business model and coming up with some pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah.
There are lots of companies that don't, but it's not an absolute. So in and of itself, I do not believe that size is an absolute barrier to innovation. That just is not, the evidence wouldn't support that. Now, the second point is that If you are an employed physician, you have to run into this issue of what are we talking about when we're talking about entrepreneurship? Because it always comes back to what is your definition of entrepreneurship? What are we talking about? And what is your
Mm.
definition of innovation? Well, the traditional notion, and I think it's misguided and short sighted, is if you ask 100 people, what do you think innovation is about? They're going to say creating a company and making a lot of money. Well, that's not really the ground truth as far as I'm concerned. So, my definition of entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunity, in this particular case in sick care, under volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous conditions, so called VUCA conditions, with the goal of creating, and this is the highlight, so pay attention, with the goal of creating user defined value at significant multiples of the existing entities or the status quo. So the goal is to create multiples of user defined value through the deployment of innovation, using a viable business model to achieve the sextuple aims. So I've just given you a definition that has 6 parts. And we could get into the weeds on each one of them. But the point is, creating a company is one of many, many, many ways to satisfy the definition. And as such, if you are a healthcare professional trying to get an idea to a patient, directly or indirectly, there are many, many ways to do that. You could be a medical practice entrepreneur, so-called private practice. You could be a social entrepreneur to make the world a better place. You could be a techpreneur, create a gadget or a device like I tried to do many years ago and still am doing. You could be a medical education technology entrepreneur. So there's a lot. You could be a physician investor and start a VC fund. So entrepreneurs create value. They don't just create companies. So if you are a physician who is employed, you are now expected to practice intrapreneurship. So what's intrapreneurship? Intrapreneurship is my definition I just gave you as it applies when you are an employed physician trying to act like an entrepreneur within your organization.
Mm.
Dealing with all of the issues that we just had this conversation about. Is it harder to innovate within a large organization where you are an employee? And that's a very long conversation about what are the success factors of organizations that can do that. But from the standpoint of an employed physician, and this gets to the topic of this webinar podcast, is if you don't deliver value to your employee, there is a reason, or employer, there's a reasonable chance that your white coat one day will get the pink slip.
Right.
So why should you learn physician intrapreneurship? Self-interest.
Sure. No, I think that all makes sense. I guess my question came from the perspective of a lot of people who are skeptical, and even my own experience working with some of these larger organizations. It goes back to something you said before. A lot of these healthcare organizations are risk adverse, and they're not willing to, even though they could have the financial backing to create something new and different. It's risky to take on these ventures, and especially as a physician in an employed position, if you do create something new, a new gadget, new tool, new way of doing something, with the idea of spinning out and making it your own, if you create it within the confines of your employed position, I know at least from my own personal employment contracts in the past, I wouldn't have ownership over what I create because I'm creating it while I'm working for someone else. So I couldn't even spin out on my own afterwards with this idea because the idea no longer belongs to me, even though I'm the one who came up with it. So, how do you navigate those waters?
All right. So that gets to what are the intrapreneurial survival skills? How do you do this so that you don't get so frustrated that you just quit or you just give up on your idea?
Yeah. Right.
So here's some attendings share clinical judgment. So I'm going to give you entrepreneurial judgment based on the mistakes that I made. It's like when you screw things up in the operating room, like that's how you develop clinical judgment. So I'm going to give you I'm going to share my mistakes and tell you what I learned. I have a very long failure resume.
Yeah, same.
Many doctor does. I mean,
Yeah.
if you don't have complications, you're not doing enough cases. So
Right.
it's we know that, but the average
Yeah.
person doesn't kind of get that, but we know that. So anyway, so here's a couple things. First of all, and let's go back to the beginning. So when one of the problems is that when residents, first of all, medical students and residents generally have no business in learning any of this stuff, the business of medicine and contracts and what do I get paid and IP and all that. The only time I get approached by residents typically is 6 months before they're ready to graduate and they're thinking about finding a job and somebody shoves a contract under their nose. And they have no clue what to look for. What am I reading? All I want to know is how much money are you going to pay me and do I have to take call?
Right.
And
Right.
all the other stuff, and you're going to pay for my moving expenses. Or what are the schools like? Those kinds of questions. They don't read the contract, A, and B, they don't even look at like what's in it. Like even if they read it, it's what's not in it. So my point is read the employment contract. And if you are thinking of being a physician intrapreneur, there are specific things in the contract that should be included that you will be asked to agree to. In this conversation, it has to do with the intellectual property ownership terms and conditions. So to your point, if you decide or you create something as an employee of your organization, now I'm not an intellectual property lawyer and I don't pay one on TV, so don't take any of this for legal advice. I'm just saying that you need to read the contract and understand the terms and conditions of who owns anything you create. Now, you could create stuff that has nothing to do with your employment. You're a trauma surgeon working in the ER for Optum, and you decide to build a gadget that hangs something in the shower, like one of those suction cup things or a
Sure.
cradle or whatever. It has nothing to do with what you're doing. So you're pretty much good to go. You could, if it does not involve substantial employer resources, then you're okay. You can do whatever you want. But if during your course of employment you use substantial employer resources, or you just create anything that has to do with medicine as an employee of this organization, it's likely that you will have to relinquish the intellectual property rights to your employer. Now, does that mean positively, absolutely, that you can never do anything with that again? No. Because there are ways of negotiating. For example, in a university tech transfer, this comes up all the time, but it's also coming up in community hospitals. So that, for example, I submit an invention there has to be a process, which a lot of hospitals don't have. So, for example, I'm working for Optum. I have an idea to create an optical device to detect cancer in the mouth. I don't have any idea who to go to figure this out. I mean, whose door do I knock on?
Yeah.
It's not IT. It's the VP for medical affairs. Is it the corporate counsel? I mean, who the heck do I go to? And secondly, what's the process? Do I have to file an invention disclosure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So there's a lot of elements to this, but my pitch to intrapreneurs, physician intrapreneurs, is understand the intellectual property terms and conditions of your contract. If you don't know what the heck these terms mean, find somebody who does to advise you. Okay?
Yeah.
But it absolutely positively does not mean you can't do anything with it. You just have to understand what the rules of the game are. Second point, intrapreneurship, in my view, and I've been down this road a couple times, I believe is much harder than extrapreneurship. In other words, just what we would consider routine entrepreneurship. You develop a product or a service and you try to sell it and do all the deal. Why? Because A, you have to deal with all of the issues of getting an idea to a patient, business models, and all the stuff you have to go through. But more importantly, you have to deal with the corporate immune system that will snuff out anything that's new like a grape. So that involves office politics. That involves street cred. That involves selling. You have to, because you're going to be asked to sell your idea to the decision makers. And there could be 5 layers of them.
Yeah, right.
So how do you do that? It's in a lot of ways the same way as if you're trying to sell a product to a customer. You just have a different decision maker. And so what does the decision maker want? You got, right now, I can tell you, hospital decision makers are consumed with making more money, cutting costs, retaining people, finding and retaining people to take care of patients, and not getting their system hacked so it costs them $1 gazillion.
Right.
That's what they're worried about. Right?
Yeah.
So if you know that that's the food that the dog wants to eat, then you have to craft something internally to satisfy that need. So if you show up with something that has, how's this going to help me in the next, and it has speed to value, how long is it going to take? If you're telling me that I can cut my cost 2%, but it's going to take me 18 months to get there, meanwhile, the lights go out, the meter runs. So all of these elements you sort of have to think through, and I don't blame them. It's very difficult to create what's called an ambidextrous organization. And in this present time, and that means you're able to create the now, the next, and the new. The now means I just got to use the existing business model to keep the heat, light, and electricity on. And in most hospitals, that's about 99% of the effort. The next, so that's the now. The next is, okay, how can we tweak the business model? That usually means we're going to offer more services to existing markets, or we're going to offer we're going to take the other way around. We're going to take products and create new markets. So new markets, new products, 2x2 matrix, same box. But the new is, how do we make the existing business model obsolete before somebody else does?
Mm-hmm.
That's extremely difficult, particularly in large organizations. So when you see these companies radically changing their business model to reinvent themselves, that is a major accomplishment.
Sure.
So if you're risk averse and you have no idea, you don't want to do that. And so as an intrapreneur, if you go to the VP of whatever and say, or the CEO of the hospital and say, look, I've done a lot of work on this. I've done a proof of concept. I've piloted it. I haven't told you about this Mr. President, because I knew you were going to snuff it out the minute you discovered it. So that's another tip. Innovate your heart out. Just don't tell anybody about it
Hmm.
until you are ready to launch. Now, that's why some startups go dark. There are reasons for doing it both ways, but in general, don't stick your head above water. And don't tell anybody about your IP until you have protected it. Goes back to the IP issue.
Sure.
So, and if I go to the boss and say, look, I've been working on this for a while, and what I'm finding is we need to significantly change the model. Translation, this is going to put you out of a job. That's a problem. So, and it may be the truth, but those are the kinds of issues that you have to deal with. So how do you learn all this stuff? Because most folks don't know how to do this. They don't
Right.
know how to be an entrepreneur, and they certainly don't know how to be an intrapreneur. That's not why you got hired.
Right.
You got hired to put points on the board using the business model. I just want you to row the boat you're sitting in and make sure all the oars are in the same direction. I don't want you to reinvent another boat. But you say, well, I don't like this boat. I think sick care is a really sick system. It's inequitable. We're spending a fortune. We're not getting good outcomes. Everybody's grumpy. I want to fix it. And that means you're going to lose your job.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Right. Because you're swimming against the stream, just like
Right.
salmon's right into the mouth of a bear.
And this is not a new idea. This goes back to Machiavelli in 1543, advising the prince. There's so many vested interests that will want the 4.5 trillion to grow because there are lots of people feeding at the trough and they want to see things exactly the way they are. So that's what you're looking at.
Yeah.
Now, if that frightens you, or if you're scared of that, or like, who cares? That's not why I went to medical school. Great. Just be a doctor. See patients. We all need more people to see us. It's hard to get an appointment these days. Great. But if you really want to be a change agent, that's not going to get you there.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask, and to kind of get into that part of the conversation. I'm a morning mentor with Alloy Growth Labs morning mentoring program, which is, they call it the Dolphin Tank because it's like Shark Tank but not as vicious. And so I see all these startups come through the program every week, and I see they have a tremendous amount of technical know-how on a specific problem they're trying to fix. And this isn't just medical related, right? This is an international program that is open to any entrepreneurial venture. So it's been a variety of products. So not specific to healthcare, but I see a lot of the support that these people need, and it's not just related to money. It's about leadership skills, organizational skills, business skills, and try to get the solution that they came up with, whatever product it is, actually up and running and into a viable form that will ultimately self-sustain itself and return the interest back to the investors as well. So what kind of support from your perspective do physicians need, healthcare providers need? I mean, what's been your experience with through the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs for
Right.
the kind of support and education that physicians need who do want to go down that entrepreneurial route?
Right. So the answer to that question is, I believe that if you want to go down this road, you're going to need some tools. So and what we provide, that is we meaning the society, is education and access, and that's the least important, incidentally. Education does not change behavior,
Right?
but you got to learn
Yeah,
some stuff,
you got
right? I
to
mean,
you
you
got
got
to
to kind of
basic
learn the
know how.
basic
Yeah,
science before you go to the bedside.
yeah,
So same deal. So we're going to teach you the basic science. So it's basically education and access to resources, networks, mentors, experience, peer support, and non-clinical career guidance. So you got to be part of an ecosystem. Sick care can't be fixed from inside. You got to be part of a much bigger universe to make this work. And it's got to be inside in, inside out, outside in. So it's got to be like open innovation kind of thing. From the standpoint of how do you succeed as an intrapreneur, assuming, okay, I buy into that. I get that. I don't know what I don't know. Thanks for setting this up, Arlen. I want to be part of this so I can learn some stuff. Great. That's a good first step. So now you're going to try to be an intrapreneur as an employed physician. The real key to this is, do you have what it takes personally to do this? Because part of it is, as we've been talking about, the system, but a lot of it is what you see when you look in the mirror. So are you built to do this? And I think you have to ask yourself three basic questions. There's a lot of questions you can ask yourself and talk
true.
about it. But the first one is, I think it takes mindset, means, and motivation. Call them the 3 M's. So, do you have an entrepreneurial mindset? And if you don't, and we can talk about what that means, but it basically means how you see the world.
Yeah.
Opportunity versus challenge, half full, half empty, blah, blah, blah. So do you have an entrepreneurial mindset in addition to your clinical mindset, which is very different?
Yes.
So the clinical mindset and the entrepreneurial mindset are two overlapping circles if you're playing as a physician entrepreneur. And that place in the middle is where you need to play.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have the complementary skill sets to do that? So that's the mindset. It's the most important thing. Second, do you have the means? Now, means, do you have money in the bank to do this? I mean, do you have resources? How much runway do you have? Are you $260,000 in debt as a medical student, married to another doctor who's $260,000 in debt? And you come home and you say, darling, guess what? I don't think I want to practice medicine anymore. I think I want to be an intrapreneur. I listened to this podcast and I got all juiced about it. So I think I want to do that. What do you think? You know, and you get this look, like that conversation. So you have to kind of be real about this. I mean, as I said, most people work for the man because they're risk averse and they want to sit their paycheck.
Right.
You're going to be risking that. Because if you screw this up as an employed physician and start making noise, you wind up with a pink slip. Gets to the issue of, are you a disruptive physician or a disruptive physician? Disruptive physician means somebody like I'm a surgeon. So a disruptive physician classically means you're a pain in the neck, you're a jerk, and you threw a scalpel at a scrub nurse. That's not healthy. That's disruptive. I'm talking about disruptive in the business sense. Are you trying to screw up this business model, unquote, and make a lot of this noise that's just creating heartache for everybody? Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do.
But as long as the intent is good, right? As long as you're actually trying to improve on something.
Yeah,
and
but
not
even if the intent is good, no good deed goes unpunished.
Well, sure, yeah.
I mean, that's a nice sentiment, but unfortunately, it's not true in my mind. So you have to deal with the reality of situations. So mindset, means, motivation. And what I say about motivation is, if you want to be an intrapreneur or any kind of entrepreneur, you make it personal, but you don't take it personally. What does that mean? It means that this is really hard stuff. This is going to take a lot of your time and energy to get this done. If you're successful, the likelihood of your being successful is slim to none. I mean, the success rate of a new venture or a new product is less than 5-7%, something like that, particularly in bioscience.
Yeah.
So it's a very high risk venture. So this is what you're getting yourself into. But so therefore, you have to have something that trips your trigger to keep you going and motivated. It has to be personal. It has to be something that happened to you. It has to be an illness in your family that nobody can figure out. It has to be a child. It has to be an awful experience you had with the sick care system. So in my story, I was pissed off. I don't like the system. I'm trying, and I didn't like how it impacted me, and I want to change it.
Hmm.
I'm still that way. So, and I tell people, don't mistake my anger for passion. What motivates
Yeah.
me is anger and revenge, not
Yeah.
passion. I mean, what do I know about passion? It's like, here's what I did. I didn't like it. I want to fix it. So you have to have that personal itch that has to be scratched. But you're going to fail, guarantee you. So you don't take it personally. You give up on the idea, you pull the plug when you have to, you do what's necessary. You don't just stick around because you're stubbornly optimistic. You move on. So you don't take it personally. You're
You
going to
got
fail.
learn your lessons and move on and
Right,
do it better next time. Yeah.
right. Take personal responsibility for the failure and see the silver lining. You now have a new opportunity to try something else, but you've learned something. It's called clinical judgment. That
Entrepreneurial
doesn't mean you quit
judgment
being
too.
a doctor when a patient goes south. You just learned something.
Yeah.
Right.
So, in knowing all that, it's definitely a different mindset to go down that entrepreneurial route. Like you said yourself, you either you have it. I mean, it can be cultivated to some degree too. I mean, some people aren't aware that they could be successful in that venture. It's something that maybe was never an option to them. No one in their circles has ever even brought up
All
the
right. So
idea,
let
and
me
so
just
they don't
interrupt
even
you.
know.
Let me just interrupt you and address that point. So I refer to a lot of people. First of all, the good news is that the mindset can be uh, improved as compared to a personality. Most of your
Right.
personality psychologists will say your personality is sort of set by the time you're 8 years old or whatever. It changes a little bit as you get older, but your personality is your personality. Mindsets can change. So the good news is all is not hopeless. If you say to yourself, well, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. If you want to do this, you can. Secondly, I also believe that a lot of physicians are intrapreneurs. I kind of made that up. Like intrapreneurs, it
Yeah.
means you actually do have an entrepreneurial mindset. It just hasn't been cultivated.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. That's the point I'm trying to make. Exactly. Yeah.
And oh, by the way, that's not why you got into medical school. So you didn't get in. I didn't get into medical school because I was this creative genius. I got in because I could take standardized tests. I could memorize a bunch of stuff. I knew what to say at the interviews. You know the drill.
Yeah.
It's a culture of conformity, medicine. Entrepreneurship is a culture of creativity and a lot of other C's, which you are not graded on when you submit your medical school application. So
That's a
you
good
didn't
point.
get into school because of this. And actually, if you tell people at your medical school or residency interview that you are interested in this stuff, it works against you.
Yeah.
So if I said if you're interviewing, and fortunately I'd have to do this, but if you're interviewing for medical school these days, and the person who's interviewing says, Arlen, why do you want to be a doctor? And you say, I just want the MD after my name because I'm actually interested in creating a biotech company. And it'll give me street cred and credibility and credentials. You think you're going to get into medical school?
Yeah.
Now,
Not.
and this gets to the previous question, how have things changed? Little by little, people are gradually figuring out the etiology of academia.
I
By
love
that
that
I
term, by
mean,
the way.
yeah,
I love
but
that term. That's so
it's not mine.
fantastic.
I steal it all the time. Nothing's new under the sun. Somebody else
Uh,
mentioned it. But the point is medical school and the medical school curriculum and training model is so outdated The last time we fixed it was Flexner in 1912.
Yeah, I was
It's
gonna say.
over
Yep.
100 years old. It's time to get with it.
Yep. Now, but to your point, though, I come from the University of Miami, and when I was going through it, they were one of the first universities that actually implemented an MBA pathway through the program as well. So, I think there are some schools that are seeing these changing times, and I
Right.
think
And
if you
I think
go
that's
to
totally worthless. So now we're going to get into the MD MBA story. So 200 medical schools in the United States, allopathic, osteopathic. I just found out that there are roughly 150,000 residents in the system, and there are approximately 100,000 medical students in the system as we speak. We're talking about 250,000 people who are a considerable force for change. It's another reason why I'm reasonably optimistic. These folks aren't going to put up with this crap. And more people are applying. So last week was the match. So a lot of this conversation was going on. What do you want to do? What do you grow up? And which specialty and primary care and blah, blah, blah. I believe that's and the persona is going to push change. They're social activists. And I think that's going to change things. So that's another reason. But another point that I'll make, though, is and do I have an MBA? Yes. Was I involved in an MD MBA program? No, because they weren't around, but I did it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, 65% of the roughly 200 medical schools are offering combined MD MBA programs. Do I think that the individual cost now, whether you get an MD MBA either during school or after is entirely up to you. It's an individual cost benefit decision. But if you are interested in physician entrepreneurship, do I think that an MBA will help you be successful? No. Do I
That was
think
the
it will
question I
help?
was trying to get at.
Do
Yeah,
I
okay.
think it will help you run a private practice? It didn't in my case. I ran a private practice for 7 or 8 years, and I thought, gee, I guess I ought to get an MBA. It didn't. And there are many, many reasons why. Am I saying don't get an MBA, don't get more education? Of course not. That's what I do for a living. I'm an educator. But there's a time and a place, and if the cost benefit doesn't work out and you are $260,000 in debt as a medical student, and now you want to tack on another 100,000 at Wharton a year, no. Just go out and do it.
Well, yeah, go ahead. Finish your thought.
I was going to say, don't let school get in the way of your education.
Oh, right. Yes, that's always a good one. No, I mean, where I was coming at with this was, your point that if you wanted to be a, inventor and get that street cred with the MD after your name, it doesn't get you into medical school. In my mind, it might get you into the MBA school. But then my question was exactly that: does the MBA actually add anything? And really, where I was trying to get at was, if you look at the cost of healthcare over the years, it's correlated with the number of MBAs in the system. But the one thing we're still missing, I think, a lot is actual physician leadership at the top of a lot of these healthcare organizations. They're run by people with MBAs as a business and not by physicians as healthcare organizations, which is why we now have sick care more than healthcare. So where do you see that changing over time with more physicians maybe getting into the MBAs and maybe having opportunity to get up into those executive spaces?
So I think correlating the rising cost of healthcare with the number of MBAs is true, and unrelated. So that's D in the multiple choice test. 2, I think that, well, statistically, do hospital systems run by doctors do better than hospital systems not run by doctors? Now, people have looked the yin yang, and where you stand depends on where you sit. And some will say, yeah, the hospital driven and Cleveland clinics and the all that. I don't know. Pick your poison. So I'm not totally convinced that's true. Third, every hospital is a business. In my view, Are we there to take care of patients? Sure. Is our primary mission to make people better? Sure. But every part of the sick care enterprise is a business. Now, you may not like that, and you may not like hearing me say that. This is America, where it's a business. And the problem, at least that's where I'm coming from, and the problem is that people don't accept that. It's neither good nor bad. It is what it is. And it's what you make of it and how we navigate it. We have a choice. It's like artificial intelligence. We have a choice. Do you want to make it a good thing? Do you want to make it a bad thing?
Yeah.
Not the first time we've dealt with this issue. So the Industrial Revolution, you want to make it a good thing? Make it a bad thing. These things are created by us. They can be changed by us, and they could, work however we want to do it, whether it's private equity or corporatization or all that other stuff. So, that's how I see. That's my perspective, and that's why I'm kind of. Those are the values that I'm trying to instill to drive this change.
Yeah. Well, so
one further point is the challenge, and some people don't want to do that. Well, a lot don't want to do this. The challenge is because medicine, again, if you accept the premise that medicine is a business, you have to reconcile the ethics and culture of business with the ethics and culture of medicine, which we sign on to. And the basic tenet is you place the interest of the patient first. That is an inherent conflict of interest in the business of medicine. So How do you reconcile that? And there are ways of doing it, I think, but that's what the challenge is.
No, absolutely. And that's kind of where my question came from with getting more physicians into the leadership positions because of that conflict of interest. I mean, we go into the business of medicine, we take oaths and we swear that we always do best what's best for patients. But especially in an employed position now, there is that conflict of interest because what's best for a patient may not be good for the people that are paying me every 2 weeks, right? So
every private practice, when I was in private practice, it was a conflict of interest. When I was an employed physician for a large majority of my career, it was a conflict of interest. You cannot eliminate it. You have to mitigate it or manage it, but you can't eliminate it.
Yeah.
Every time somebody comes to me for an opinion where they could have an operation or they don't have an operation, it's a conflict of interest because I get paid to do the operation. Mm-hmm. So I need to sort of try to be an honest broker, and particularly when it comes down to preference-sensitive conditions and shared decision-making. Early stage prostate cancer, you're talking to a urologist. It's a conflict of interest unless they raise the bar. That's the challenge. And Unfortunately, it's hard to do the right thing. We're human. And there are bad actors and good actors and everything, but that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I do want to circle back to the topic that we had initially discussed we were going to talk about, and that is if your white coat is given the pink slip, right? I mean, we've talked so much about, and I think that's happening more and more. I mean, if you're in an employed position, there is a real chance that you might be given the pink slip, whether that's as a resident, a fellow, or even as an attending. Whereas, 50, 60 years ago, if you were in private practice, you were the only person who might give you the pink slip. So knowing all this entrepreneurial stuff that we've talked about, all the business stuff we talked about, the intrapreneurial side of things, what should physicians do if they are given the pink slip? What does that really look like in today's world? How do they?
So this is another long conversation, and I just want to mention that every single one of these topics I've written something about. So if you're interested in getting into the weeds, let me know, and I'll steer you in the right direction. And because we don't have time to go through it all, but just to give some highlights. Number one, always have plan B. Always have plan B. You never know when that's going to happen. There is no corporate loyalty. You always have to have plan B. If this happens, then you have a ripcord. Number two, there are warning signs that things aren't going quite right, and maybe I'm on the bubble. Like, you know the drill. I mean, you're not getting along with your boss. There's this gossip. Something's happened. You just know in your gut, and there's some danger signs. I mean, it's kind of like the danger signs of having a stroke. You have hypertension and hypercholesterol. They're risk factors. So identify, and you have to be honest with yourself. If just things aren't working out, if this just doesn't feel right, you know, it's like that old saying, uh, you have to be, only the paranoid survive. It's an old Intel saying. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean,
Yeah.
so be prepared with plan B. Now, if and when you get the pink slip, then you're going to have to deal with, okay, or pre-pink slip, like the warning signs start going off. Then you got to decide, do I want to persist, pivot, or persevere? Persist means, I really like this place. I'm not sure what exactly did to piss this person off. So I'm going to have a conversation and figure that out. Like, what did I do wrong? Why? Well, then they'll tell you, if they're
Hmm.
honest. If they're not and they just don't like you, they'll fire you. Generally, it's not like these days you can just walk up and fire someone. They create a paper trail, stuff happens. This is not the first time we run into this. It's not the first time you've thrown a scalpel at a nurse, that kind of stuff, or all the other dark underbelly of medicine stuff. Um, so they're warning signs. You just have to be honest with yourself. Um, so if you want to persevere, then figure it out. Like, do what you need to do to make things right. If you're going to pivot, that means I really substantially need to change what I'm doing. I need to work in a different place. I need to just, this isn't tripping my trigger. I'm just unhappy. I don't see this changing. So I'm going to have to change some stuff. And that's how then you start pulling in plan B. Now, how you create plan B is another conversation. And what you need to do and what should be in plan B in your personal and professional development plan, all that other stuff. And then the third option is punt. That means I don't want to do this anymore. Now, this could mean I don't want to have anything to do with medicine anymore. I've always wanted to write a novel. I'm going to go write a novel.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to do XYZ. I'm going to go do XYZ. It has nothing to do with medicine. Or I want to stay in medicine. I want to try to help people, but I don't want to do it seeing 20 a day for the rest of my life. So I want to pursue non-clinical careers that somehow, some way, somewhere can help people down the road. That's a whole nother line of preparation, but I would ask you to consider that option before you have to use it. The primary thing I'd suggest you do is build your networks. Network, network, network. Because
Oh,
when it
yeah.
comes time to execute plan B, it's going to be all about who you know, not what you know.
Yep. I mean, that's the case, and not just in healthcare. That's really the case in any
It's
part of
life
your life.
these days in
That's life.
any
Yeah.
sort of job, right? I don't care whether you're
Right.
graduating college or you're a 20-year doctor clinician and you're looking for plan B.
Yeah. So, we just had the batch day, and I could think of a few times when residents that were working for me, uh, they were given the pink slip, sometimes out of the blue, sometimes unexpected to them, and it's difficult for them to find new positions because especially as you go up in the PGY levels, the additional positions are just getting more sparse. So, what do you tell for someone who doesn't have a plan B, who is maybe just in the residency position, early out, starting out, doesn't have a whole lot of experience? What do those
Right.
people do?
So again, let me preface the answer to this by saying that for many, many years, I was a residency program director and vice chairman and all that stuff. So I was in the weeds in all of this. Um, Generally, the statistics are that about 5%, 6% of medical students do not complete medical school in 6 years, not
Hmm.
4, 6 years. Generally, it's 4 years. Sometimes you cut them some slack. When it comes to residency training programs, it's a little bit more. It's about 7 to 9% of residents do not complete their residency in the allotted time. Residents leave or get fired. Well, they leave because they want to or they have to. In other words, they got fired.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that's usually the case. Most of those happen, in my experience, because of they did something wrong. Alcohol, drug abuse, they committed a crime, they did something that was stupid, that was a felony. I mean, all that stuff. So they got fired. They made a mistake, and I'm sorry, but you're gone. Some, not so much, say, you know what? I thought I wanted to be an ENT doctor. Turns out I really wanted to be a psychiatrist. Okay, that's okay. But as you said, the repercussions of firing a resident in the first year is not nearly as bad as firing someone in the third or fourth year. So unfortunately, people who are substandard in a residency have a better chance of sticking around in the third and fourth year than they did in the first year. Because if you fire them in the first year, you wind up getting sued. As an academic, as a program director or the program or accreditation committee, not 100%, but there are issues with firing residents, let alone the human resource issues and the employment law issues. So
Yeah.
the world's gotten pretty complicated. And now you got to deal with a new persona. I don't want to work this hard. If you don't give me what I want, guess what? I'm going to join a union, and guess what? We're going to go on strike. You didn't hear that 50 years ago, but you hear it
Sure.
almost every day now. There's another story about residents and basketball teams and God knows who joining unions and then striking. And it's not a U.S. particular problem because they're doing it in Korea, they're doing it in England, they're doing it burning tires in the streets of Paris sometimes. It's all over the place. So it's a different persona. Again, it's a different mindset. So you have to deal with that stuff, let alone the generational differences of how people want to work or don't want to work. So what do you do and then there's a final group, which I call what to do when you're in the soup, SOUP. And that means the Society of Unmatched Physicians.
Mm.
So this gets to the match. So 50,000 people applying to the match, finite number of residency slots. Last year, bottom line, about 8,000, I think about 7 to 8,000 people who had an MD that applied for the match did not match ultimately. Because, if you don't match, you can go through what they call the SOAP, no relation to SOPE, but the SOAP thing where you do the scramble, and then eventually you get into. When all that is said and done, about 8,000 people did not match with an MD or a DO after their name. In some instances with an MBBS after their name. So what do those folks do? They're in the soup.
Right.
Society of Unmatched Physicians. That is the prime group that should pursue non-clinical careers. Now, what do we do with those people now? We throw them in the street. They're pariahs, which I think is criminal. I mean, you've gone through 4 years of college, 4 years. I don't care whether it's international medical graduates, whether you're a U.S. citizen going to a foreign school, a foreign person going to a foreign school. You've been through all this. You're not an idiot. I mean, you have a lot to contribute. You're a vital asset. We're bitching and moaning about the physician shortage, which I think is another hype thing. And yet we're not doing anything with these people who didn't match. And
Right.
they didn't match, not through, sure, some people didn't match because they were jerks. But a lot of them didn't match because there simply were not enough positions. And there weren't enough positions because they're federally funded through Medicare, and we don't want to spend the money.
Yeah.
It's a discordance. You're blowing smoke. So you have to see for what it is. So my advice to people who don't match, and I give this advice frequently because of what I do, And residents and med students say, nobody listens to me. I don't know what to do. I read about you. I heard your podcast. Can you give me some advice? My first advice is don't take my advice because you're you and I'm me. But if you want to take my advice, here's what I advise you do. And I walk them through the drill of how do you create this non-clinical career pathway so that you can contribute value. That's the bottom line.
Right. Yeah, we had that discussion with a couple of people in the SOAP the
Right.
LinkedIn group just
Right.
over the past week with people who didn't match, right?
Right.
And one of them I think was trying to go for neurosurgery, and which is definitely a competitive match, but she's clearly bright, so
Right.
it's
And
one
let
of
me
those
give
things,
you a
right?
follow-up. Let me give you a follow-up to that. Now, for those of you who are listening, this is now becoming a commonly discussed problem. So we set up like a little LinkedIn discussion group to tell stories and how can we help each other. And that's the other point. No one is going to help us unless we help ourselves. The only way this is going to get done is if doctors help other doctors figure it out.
Yes.
That's why I'm doing this. The man's not going to do it. Medical schools aren't going to do it in our lifetime. Residency training programs aren't going to do it. We have to help ourselves until maybe they get off the dime and do something.
Well,
So
all
we
these,
created, so we
yeah, no, I
created
mean
this
all
group,
these,
and
yeah,
the
go ahead.
person that you're talking about, without divulging confidentiality, that person got in touch with me the other day and said, "Guess what? I took your advice and I matched into a single year transitional residency that could prepare her for something else in the next match."
That's awesome.
So these things do work out. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but so it was fun that she's all excited. Oh, thanks a lot, and I like the group, and blah blah blah. Which is why we do this stuff. We're just trying to help folks.
Right. No, I mean, but to your point, what I was just trying to say is all these other entities have their own agenda. And at the end of the day, we have to look out for ourselves because no one else is here to look out for us
Right.
other than ourselves, right? I mean,
Right.
that's the end of the day. But at least
Right.
amongst all of us, we're all physicians. We're all like we said before, conditioned the same way. We're thinking the same way.
Yeah.
Have the same ideas inside our brains, and that's why we should help each other out. Arlen, it's been a fantastic conversation. We touched upon so many things that we could go on for hours. How can people reach out to you? How can they learn more about the society?
So if you haven't, I'm all over the internet. So if you haven't, if you have anything to do with the internet, just connect to me on the internet, my LinkedIn profile, all kinds of articles and stuff. And if you're interested in joining the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, again, it's pretty cheap. It's like $80 a year, unless you're a student or a discount and all that. And the website is www.soapnet, SOPEnet.org. And you join, and then you get in a group, and we help each other.
Yeah. I mean, I could definitely vouch for the community so far. I just joined last week, and I think even the discussions we had so far have been just absolutely wonderful. So, thank you for putting that together. Any last words from you? Anything you want to round this out with? Anything that wasn't said that we should let the world know about?
Yeah, this gets back to make it personal, but don't take it personally. There's nothing wrong with, you can expect failure. You have to change. You have to adapt. Expect to fail. Expect to pull the plug. Give up on your idea if you have to, but don't give up on yourself.
Always bet on yourself.
Yeah.
Very much so. Awesome. Well, thanks for the conversation. This was great.
Yeah, it's fun. Thanks a lot. Hopefully we can come back and talk for another 10 hours on these on these topics.
I'm sure we will, because we have so much to unpack here still that we didn't even get to.
Right. Right. Okay. Thanks a lot.